Have you ever noticed how incredibly tempting it is when you hit a major roadblock in your life to just like blame it all on some outside force?
Oh, absolutely. It's human nature.
Right. Like you don't get the promotion at work and suddenly it's, the broader economy or a biased boss or just the universe conspiring against you.
We all do it. I mean, it's how we protect our egos.
Exactly. We do it to protect our egos.
Yeah.
But I want you to imagine what happens when an entire nation scales up that psychological defense mechanism.
Yeah, that's when it gets complicated.
Totally. It ceases to be just a personal quirk and actually becomes the bedrock of their foreign and domestic policy.
Right.
So today's deep dive is about what happens when someone inside a nation finally calls its bluff.
And it is quite a bluff to call.
It really is. We are unpacking a translated, highly provocative essay from June 5, 2023. It's titled, Who is Strangling China?
Written by an author named Xue Feng.
Right, and edited by Kinyu. And the reason we are examining this specific text today is that it directly, and honestly pretty aggressively, challenges the prevailing narrative that American imperialism is actively choking China's development.
Well, before we really get into the actual text, we need to establish some parameters for this deep dive.
Yeah, good call. Go ahead.
As guides through this material, our role is strictly impartial. We are entirely neutral observers here.
100%.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the author, and we are absolutely not taking sides in the complex, very politically charged debate between the United States and China.
Right, our goal is strictly analytical.
Exactly. We just want to dissect the rhetorical arguments, the structural logic, and the specific claims laid out in this original source material. We're trying to understand exactly how the author constructs their critique, regardless of the politics surrounding it.
Okay, let's unpack this. The author starts by attacking the core metaphor of the current geopolitical narrative, which is this concept of strangulation.
Right, they take it very literally.
They really do. The text lists the actual, literal medical symptoms of having your windpipe physically crushed.
Which is pretty intense.
It is. We're talking about, difficulty breathing, a sore throat, a severe headache, dizziness, a sudden loss of motivation, and facial redness.
Basically, the clinical signs of asphyxiation.
Exactly. And then the author looks at China, a nation of 1.4 billion people with the world's second largest economy, and basically asks, hey, does this nation actually display these medical symptoms?
And the author's answer to that is an absolute no.
Right, a resounding no. But I have to push back here right at the start. I mean, isn't literalizing a political metaphor just kind of a cheap rhetorical trick?
How do you mean?
Well, the foreign policy establishment isn't claiming the country is literally gasping for physical air. It's a metaphor.
I get that. What's fascinating here is that it sounds like a purely semantic game on the surface, but it's actually a profound critique of national self-esteem and victimhood.
Okay, break that down for me.
So the author is arguing that adopting this strangled narrative is actually a form of structural self-sabotage. Think about the psychological mechanism at play.
Right.
If the state apparatus constantly broadcasts that the country is being strangled, it is explicitly casting a massive, powerful nation as a helpless victim.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I see where they're going with that.
The author's basically asking why a country of 1.4 billion people is pretending to be pitiful at the hands of a country with just over 300 million people. It fundamentally degrades the perceived agency of the Chinese populace.
So the argument is that a narrative meant to rally the public against an external enemy actually ends up infantilizing that same public.
Exactly. It makes the nation look inherently weak to claim someone else has them by the throat.
But, the author can't just dismiss this feeling of victimhood without addressing the very real catalyst behind it. I mean, the reason the Chinese public feels strangled isn't just drawn out of thin air.
No, it's driven by severe international restrictions on advanced microchips and technology.
Right. Actual embargoes. So how does the text handle the reality of those?
This is where the author introduces the neighbor's apple analogy.
The neighbor's apple. Okay.
The text proposes a scenario where, let's say, your neighbor spends considerable time, energy, and resources to cultivate a brand new, highly desirable type of apple.
Sounds delicious.
Right. But if that neighbor decides they refuse to sell it to you or share the seeds with you, that is entirely their right as the creator.
Sure, it's their apple.
Exactly. You wouldn't call the authorities and claim your neighbor is physically strangling you just because you are denied access to their new invention.
Oh, I see. And the author maps this directly onto the microchip situation.
Precisely. If the wicked American empire, as the text frames the public narrative, produces advanced chips but refuses to sell them, the author argues it is intellectually dishonest to label the denial of a product as strangulation.
I mean, my initial reaction to that section was that comparing a microchip to a shiny new apple
Yeah.
feels a bit reductive.
It's a bit of an oversimplification, sure.
Yeah, because a microchip isn't just a snack, right? It is the foundational building block of the entire modern global economy.
That's a fair point.
But thinking about the underlying mechanism of the author's argument, it reminds me more of structural dependency.
How so?
Well, it's like building your entire house out of a highly specialized proprietary material that only one company in the world manufactures.
Right.
If that company eventually decides to stop selling it to you, you are left with a half-built house. But the vulnerability was built into your own architecture from day one. You can't just blame the supplier for your own structural failure.
And that structural dependency is exactly the dynamic the author is trying to expose. The expectation that a foreign entity is obligated to supply the foundation for your economy is a flaw in planning, not an act of war.
Wow, yeah, that's a harsh truth.
And to ensure the reader fully separates the concept of being denied a luxury from being violently attacked, the text actually escalates the rhetoric to a deeply uncomfortable place.
Oh yeah, the wife analogy.
Yes. The author asks the reader to imagine they just married a beautiful, charming wife. The honeymoon isn't even over.
Right.
Suddenly, your neighbor knocks on the door and demands that you share or sell your wife to them.
Which is just insane.
Completely insane. And when you refuse, the neighbor starts screaming to the whole town that you are strangling them.
I have to say, when I read that wife analogy, it felt completely out of left field.
It's very jarring.
Super jarring.
Mm-hmm.
The text violently shifts from international trade law to something deeply personal and obviously untouchable. I mean,
Yeah.
I kind of laughed at the absurdity of it. It's like
Right.
demanding your neighbor give you the keys to their brand new car.
And then calling the cops on them when they refuse.
Exactly. But what rhetorical purpose does that extreme escalation actually serve here?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't it risk alienating the reader entirely?
It is jarring, but it serves a very specific structural purpose in the author's logic.
Okay, I'm listening.
When discussing microchips, the reader's mind immediately gets bogged down in geopolitical fairness, trade tariffs, national security, complex supply chains.
Sure, all the political baggage.
Right. By shifting the analogy to something universally understood as inviolable espouse, the author strips away all that geopolitical jargon to expose the raw nerve of entitlement.
Oh, that's really interesting.
It forces the reader to confront the sheer absurdity of feeling entitled to someone else's domain. The author is basically demanding the reader draw a hard, uncompromising boundary between, I desperately want what you have, and you are committing an act of violence against me.
Man, that clears away the international relations noise really fast. It makes it a question of basic boundaries.
Exactly.
But the essay doesn't just dismantle the false definition of strangulation. The author actually provides a counterexample to define what real strangulation would look like in an economic context.
Yes, the solar battery example.
Right. They write that if you invent a new type of solar battery, and to build it, you absolutely require specific raw materials that can only be sourced from your neighbor.
Okay.
If the neighbor then refuses to sell you those basic raw materials, that is actual strangulation.
Notice the mechanical difference in that definition.
Yeah.
The apple is a finished, high-value product created by someone else's innovation. The solar battery is your own internal innovation, blocked only by a denial of basic foundational elements.
Ah, I see the distinction.
This specific definition is crucial because it allows the author to execute a massive pivot away from foreign policy and directly into a blistering domestic critique.
So what does this all mean? How does this solar battery definition lead into the next part of the essay?
Well, this is exactly where the text unleashes a rapid-fire barrage of questions aimed squarely at China's internal economy.
Oh, right, the capital flight stuff.
Yeah. The author points out that a significant number of incredibly talented individuals are leaving China to join the enemy camp.
Yeah.
A massive amount of Chinese wealth is flowing out of the country. Foreign investments are rapidly withdrawing, and numerous domestic businesses are shutting their doors.
But, I have to play devil's advocate again here.
Go for it.
Isn't it highly probable that some of this capital and talent flight is genuinely the result of foreign sanctions making it too difficult or unprofitable to operate domestically?
The author actually anticipates that exact counterargument.
Well, they do.
Yes. The text links those economic wounds to a series of pointed, repeated questions. Who forced them? And who orchestrated this?
Who made them leave?
Exactly. The structural mechanism the author is highlighting here is agency. Foreign sanctions might create friction, sure, but no foreign power is holding a gun to the heads of these specific talented individuals, forcing them to emigrate.
That's true.
No outside force is legally mandating the closure of these domestic businesses. Capital and talent are highly fluid, right? They naturally flow toward environments where they are treated well and where they can operate predictably.
So by relentlessly asking who forced them, the author implies that these wounds are internally driven.
Precisely.
So the implication is that if the smartest minds and the venture capital are fleeing, they aren't fleeing an external blockade. They are fleeing a hostile internal environment.
That's the argument.
Basically, the real strangulation is coming from inside the house.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
And the essay doesn't stop at macroeconomic theories either. It drills all the way down into the specific, really dizzying internal policies that are actively creating this hostile environment.
Yeah, the author grounds this massive theoretical framework in very concrete bureaucratic realities.
Like the agricultural mandates.
Right. They focus heavily on those to demonstrate the complete breakdown of localized knowledge and efficiency.
I mean, the text mentions a policy of returning to mountains for rice cultivation.
Yes.
The author characterizes this policy as an intellectual regression that fundamentally defies basic natural laws.
It's pretty scathing.
Very. Then there's the description of a constant, exhausting policy whiplash. One moment the mandate is returning forests for farming. Then suddenly the directive flips to returning farming for forests.
And then, seemingly out of nowhere, it flips back again.
It reminds me of like a homeowner tearing down their house to plant a garden and then immediately paving over the garden to rebuild the exact same house, just bleeding money and energy the entire time.
That's a perfect analogy. Let's examine the mechanism of why this specific whiplash is so devastating to a nation's structural integrity.
Please do.
In any top-down command structure, mandates are issued by central planners who are entirely disconnected from the ground reality.
Right. They aren't out there in the fields.
Exactly. When a bureaucrat issues an order to tear down a forest for a farm, it completely overrides the localized knowledge of the people actually living on that land.
They don't know the soil.
Right. The central planners don't factor in soil erosion, local water tables, or microclimates. Then, when the inevitable ecological or economic failure occurs, the bureaucracy panics and issues a reverse mandate.
Hence the whiplash.
Yes, the society is forced to expend massive amounts of caloric, financial, and human energy, essentially just moving dirt back and forth. It destroys capital without producing any yield whatsoever.
It's the economic equivalent of forcing a workforce to dig a massive ditch and then immediately forcing them to fill it back in. Everyone is exhausted, resources are depleted, and absolutely nothing of value has been created.
Precisely.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The author ties this chaotic expenditure of energy directly to a broader systemic critique of resource allocation across the entire society.
Yes, the steel for blades concept.
Right. The text uses this fascinating phrase. It argues that instead of using limited steel for blades, meaning focusing energy and resources on actual construction, manufacturing, and tangible wealth creation, the system has instead built endless, massive bureaucracies.
The author specifically targets sectors like urban management, agricultural management, and cultural management. This gets to the very core of the essay's structural grievance. In a functioning, productive economy, limited resources, the metaphorical steel, are allocated toward innovation.
You build better tools, right?
Exactly. You build better tools, more efficient factories, and advanced technology. But the author claims that vast amounts of manpower, intellect, and capital are being deliberately diverted away from productivity to fund surveillance and behavioral control.
The text suggests these management sectors don't just consume resources. They actively extract wealth from the productive class.
Yes, through fines and penalties.
It's a critique of a system that generates revenue through punitive fines, inspections, and enforcement, rather than through creating products or services that people actually want to buy.
It represents a definitive shift from a productive economic model to a parasitic one.
A parasitic one, wow.
Well, think about it. When a society hires more people to monitor, manage, and penalize its citizens than it hires to build, invent, and farm, the internal economic machinery begins to seize up.
The deadweight loss.
Exactly. The deadweight loss becomes insurmountable. The sheer institutional need to control people completely supersedes the need to foster prosperity.
Which leads right into the author's final and arguably most passionate argument about the inversion of innovation and justice.
This part is really striking.
It is. The text mentions that someone invented a new model for production and life that brought genuine happiness to the Chinese people.
Yeah.
But instead of being celebrated or scaled up, this innovation was labeled an illegal organization and subjected to long-term suppression.
Right.
Now, as readers of this translated text, we aren't given the specific identity of this group or organization.
True, but the specific identity is actually less important than the structural pattern of suppression the author is outlining.
How so?
From a sociological standpoint, highly managed authoritarian bureaucracies are inherently terrified of grassroots innovation.
Because they can't control it.
Exactly. If ordinary people organize themselves and successfully solve their own problems, whether those problems are economic, social, or structural, it directly threatens the state's monopoly on problem solving.
Right. If the people don't need the managers lose their jobs.
Precisely. The system feels compelled to suppress independent success simply to justify the continued existence of its own expansive management bureaucracies.
That structural fear of losing control results in what the author describes as a complete inversion of reality.
This raises an important question about how a society defines right and wrong.
Yeah, the text makes a stark, devastating claim here. It says the genuinely destructive, illegal actions of those in power are constantly deemed legal by the state apparatus. Meanwhile, the legitimate, everyday, innovative actions of ordinary people are arbitrarily deemed illegal. The essay paints a picture of a society where truth is actively silenced while lies are allowed to run rampant and unchecked.
When the legal framework of a nation is no longer used to protect its citizens or foster their potential, but is instead used exclusively as a mechanism to manage and contain them, the society loses its foundational compass.
It's just upside down.
It is. The law itself becomes just another tool of strangulation.
And that brings us to the final verdict of the essay. Returning to the title, Who is Strangling China?, the author answers their own question.
And it's quite the conclusion.
It really is. After walking through the fake medical symptoms, the entitlement of the microchip analogies, the self-inflicted wounds of capital flight, the bureaucratic chaos of the farming policies, and the systemic suppression of grassroots innovation, the author concludes.
Drumroll, please.
The ones truly strangling China's neck are not American imperialism, but the Chinese people themselves. Or, more specifically, the internal systems of control they have allowed to flourish.
It is a deeply introspective, uncompromising conclusion.
Really uncompromising.
By stripping away the external scapegoat of foreign imperialism, the author forces the reader to look inward. It places the ultimate blame, and therefore the ultimate responsibility for course correction, entirely on domestic shoulders.
Regardless of your own political background or where you happen to live, there is a universal lesson hidden inside this deeply specific political essay.
I agree completely.
This deep dive serves as a powerful reminder of how easily external scapegoats can be manufactured to distract a population from massive internal mismanagement.
It happens everywhere.
It does. It's a masterclass in why we must always look past the loudest, most convenient narrative being broadcast and force ourselves to examine the actual unglamorous structural mechanics operating underneath the surface.
Pointing a finger outward is always the path of least resistance.
So true.
But holding up a mirror to the structural flaws of your own institutions is where the real work of survival begins.
As a brief reminder as we close out, while the arguments we explored today are fierce, passionate, and highly provocative, our goal here was simply to explore the text exactly as it was written.
Right, just looking at the source material.
Exactly. We unpack the rhetoric and the logic, but we are not endorsing the political claims.
As you step away from this material, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on the mechanisms we've discussed today.
Lay it on us.
We started by analyzing the medical symptoms of a crushed windpipe, the loss of breath, the sudden loss of motivation. If a society, or even just a company or an organization you work for, becomes entirely focused on management, on constantly monitoring its people and extracting value through endless penalties rather than fostering free innovation. At what point does that obsessive internal need for control become far more dangerous to its survival than any external threat ever could be?